Years later, when I was 26, she said in the New York Times, you would tie her naked and spread-eagled on the bed, that you would take a bat to her. She said you'd hit her for any reason, but in Haverhill, Massachusetts, you were my best friend, my brothers too. I was 15 and you two were 14, and in 1974, we walked the avenues on cold, gray days, picking through dumpsters for something to beat off to. We'd beat off to anything, though I was shy about it and couldn't just do it anywhere. So one February morning, we skipped school and went downtown. It was 10 or 11 degrees, and the dirty snow piled along both sides of River Street had become ice. The air made my lungs hurt, and our noses, ears, and fingers felt burned, but you wore your faded blue jean jacket with green magic marker peace signs drawn all over it. You wore sneakers and thin fake denim pants that looked more purple than blue. It was so cold. I pulled the rubber band from my ponytail and let my hair down around my neck and leather jacketed shoulders. Your hair was long too, brown and stringy. My brother, barely 14, needed a shave. We had $1 between us, so we sat in a booth at Valhalli's Diner and drank coffee with so much milk and sugar in it you couldn't call it coffee anymore. The Greek man behind the counter hated us. He folded his black, hairy forearms across his chest and watched us take our free refills until we were giddy with caffeine. You went for your 7th cup and he yelled something at you in Greek. On the way out, you stole $2 from someone who had left their check under a sugar shaker. You paid our way on the city bus that was heated and made a loop all the way through town, along the river up to the Westgate Shopping Center, then back again. We stayed on it for 2 hours, taking the loop 6 times. In the far rear, away from the driver, you took out your black-handled buck knife and carved a peace sign into the aluminum-backed seat in front of you. For a while, I looked out the window at all the red brick factory buildings, the storefronts with their dusty windows, bright neon price deals taped to the bottom and top, bar rooms on every block. I probably thought of the high school algebra I was flunking, the gym class I hated, the brown mescaline and crystal meth and THC my sister was selling. The bus was warm, too warm, and more crowded than before. A woman our mother's age sat in her overcoat and scarf in the seat in front of you both. Her back was to you, and I'm sure she heard you laughing, but she didn't see my brother hunched forward in his seat, jerking back and forth on his penis and coming in no time, catching it in his hand. I think I looked away, and I don't remember what he did with it. After the bus, we made our way through the narrow factory streets, most of the building's windows covered with gray plywood, though your mother still worked at Schwartz's Shoe on the 5th floor when she wasn't drinking. We walked along the railroad tracks, its silver rails flush with packed snow, the wooden ties gone under, and we laughed about the summer before when we 3 built a barricade for the train. It was a wall of broken creosote ties, an upside-down shopping cart, cinder blocks, and a rusted oil drum. We covered it with brush. Then you siphoned gas from a duster behind Schwartz's and poured it on. My brother and I lit it. Air sucked by us in a whoosh, and we ran down the bank across the parking lot into the abandoned brewery to the 2nd floor to watch our fire, to wait for the Boston and Maine, to hear the screaming brakes as it rounded the blind curve just off the trestle over the river. But a fat man in a good shirt and tie showed up at the tracks. Then a cop. And we ran laughing to the 1st floor where we turned on the keg conveyor belt, lay on it belly first, and rode it up and through its trapdoor over and over. As we made our way through town, it began to snow. My brother and I were hungry, but you were never hungry. You were horny, you said. One morning, as we sat in the basement of your house and passed a homemade pipe between us, your mother upstairs, drunk on Cappy's vodka and Pepsi, singing to herself, you said, "I'm always horny in the morning." My brother and I laughed, and you didn't know why, and then you inhaled resin in your next hit and said, "Shit, man, the scream's broken." The what? The scream, the scream, like the scream door. By the time we reached the avenues, the snow had blanketed the streets. There were two sisters on 7th who lived in the projects that always had motorcycles in front of them and trash and bright-colored babies' toys. Trish and Terry were older, 16 and 17, and so skinny their breasts looked like prunes beneath their shirts. But they had dark skin and long hair, and sometimes, if they were high, they'd suck you. But there was a day party on the first floor of their building, and it had only been 2 weeks since Harry Wright and Kevin McConaughey, rent collectors for Fat Billy, both 23 and 24, beat us up. You and me just walked us out of a pot party we were both quiet at. Walked us off the front porch and in the mud, then kicked and punched us until they were through. So we kept walking, heading for a street close to the highway where we knew 3 girls who would fuck if they had wine and rubbers, though after the wine, they didn't mention the rubbers. On Cedar Street, cars spun out snow as they drove from curb to the corner store. You let out a yelp and a holler and went running after a Chevy that had just pulled away, skidding slightly as it went. You ran low, bent over so the driver wouldn't see you, and when you reached the back bumper, you grabbed it and squatted on your sneakers, your butt an inch or two from the road, and you skied away. Just like that. The snow shooting out from under the wheels of the car, from under your Zare department store sneakers, blue exhaust coughing out the pipe beside you. In the spring and summer, we hopped trucks. A mile from the highway was a crosswalk on Main with a push-button traffic signal pole that we 3 had leaned against until a truck came along and one of us pressed the button to turn red. I was the decoy that day for a white refrigerator truck from Shoe City Beef. It stopped at the line, and I crossed the street, jerking my head like a chicken to keep his attention from the mirrors while you 2 ran around the back and climbed up on the foot-wide iron ledge at the bottom of its rear doors. As soon as I got to the sidewalk, I heard the driver shift from neutral to first, heard him give it the gas. I waited for a car to drive by from the opposite direction. Then I ran out into the street behind the truck, which was only shifting up to second. You and my brother stood on the ledge, waiting, smiling, nodding your heads for me to hurry. I reached the ledge just as the truck moved into higher gear, and I grabbed the bolt lock on its back doors and pulled myself up. The truck going faster now, shifting again, dipping and rattling through a low spot in the road. You both held an iron handle on opposite sides of the door, so I stayed down, gripping the bolt lock with both hands, sitting on the ledge. A car horn behind us honked, and the driver, some man who combed his hair to the side like a teacher, shook his head and honked his horn again. You gave him the finger, and we laughed, but it was a scared laugh because the truck wasn't slowing down as it got to the gas stations in Cappy's Liquor near the highway. It was speeding up. Before, we jumped off into the grass on the highway ramp, but now we couldn't. He took the turn without leaving third gear, and you yelled, "He knows! He friggin' knows!" My brother wasn't smiling anymore, and he stuck his head around the corner and let the growing wind hit him in the face, running through the hair on his cheeks as he squeezed the handle with both hands, and I wanted to stand, to get on my feet, on something solid, but there was no room, and now the driver was in fourth gear, heading north on 495, going 50, then 60, then 65. He moved to the middle lane, and I tried not to look down at the zip of the asphalt beneath my dangling boots, but it was worse looking out at the cars, at the drivers looking at us like we might be a circus act they should catch sometime. Some honked as they passed, so I looked up at you, at the side of your face as you looked around the corner. The June wind snapping your hair back past your forehead and ears, your mouth open in a scream I could barely hear. You smiled and shook your head at my brother, then down at me, your brown eyes wet from the wind, your cheeks flushed in a satisfaction so deep I had to look back at the cars behind us, at the 6 or 7 I was convinced would run me over one after the other after my fingers failed. Miles later, at the toll booths of the New Hampshire line, the truck slowed to a stop, and we jumped off, exhausted, our fingers stiffed, and thumbed home. That fall, you went to the trade school. My brother joined me at the high school. And I saw you 6 years later in an all-night store in Monument Square. I was buying cigarettes for my college girlfriend. She waited in the car. It was winter. The floor was dirty with people's slush and mud tracks. The overhead light was fluorescent and too bright. And I was waiting my turn at the register when I saw you watching me, smiling as you walked up. You carried a carton of ice cream and a quart of Coke. I had on a sweater and a jacket, but you only wore a t-shirt, green Dickie work pants, and sneakers. You were taller than me, lean, and your young black mustache and goatee made you look sinister until you started talking in that high voice that hadn't changed since you told us you were horny in the morning. And you said you were living down on the avenues, that you were getting married soon. I said, congratulations, and then I was at the counter asking for a pack of Parliaments, and you touched me on the shoulder and said to say hi to my brother. I said I would. At the door, I glanced back at you and watched you dig into your front pocket for crumpled bills. You nodded, smiled at me, winked even. And as I left the store, the cold tightening the skin on my face, I remembered the time your mother went to visit her sister in Nebraska for a whole month. I could never understand why she went alone, why she'd leave her family like that to go off for a visit. Then my mother told me that it was detox she went to, some 28-day program in Boston. And when I told you I knew, you laughed and said, nah. But you swallowed twice and walked away to do nothing in particular. Well, 6 months after I saw you in the store, my brother and I got invitations to your wedding. We didn't go. 4 more years, and you were dead. I heard about it after you were buried. They said your wife stabbed you in the back. That's it. That was it. She stabbed you. But a year later, I was behind the bar at McMino's Lounge, and Fat Billy's son, Bill Jr., told me what really happened, that you were cooked. Always thinking your wife was cheating on you, always beating her up. That night, you ran outside off the porch to go kill the guy you thought she was fucking. This was down on one of the avenues behind the projects, and you took the trail in the back of your house. But your wife, she opened your black-handled buck knife and chased after you, screaming. She was short and small, barely 5 feet, and just as you reached the weeds, she got to you and drove it in low, sinking the blade into your liver, snipping something called the portal artery. You went down without a sound. You curled up in a heap. But your wife spent 4 hours at a neighbor's house crying before they called anyone. And then it was the cops, and you were gone. I served Bill Jr., another white Russian, and for a second I felt sure it was him she went to that night. And I thought about hitting him for not making a faster call. But I felt no heat in my hands, no pull inside me, and I've always hated woman beaters. Part of me thought you got what you deserved. I left Bill Jr. to finish his too sweet drink. The following winter, I was living in New York City in a one-room studio with my girlfriend. It was late on a Sunday morning, and we both sat with our feet up on the couch, reading the New York Times. Outside our barred window, snow fell on parked cars on the sidewalk and street. I got tired of the movie section and picked up a story about 3 women in prison, all there for the same reason, for killing the husbands who beat them, and your wife was one of them. They gave her full name, your name. They wrote how she chased you outside and stabbed you. They described the town you both lived in as economically depressed, once a thriving textile town, but no more. I lowered the paper and started to tell my girlfriend all about you, but she and I weren't doing so well. Both past wanting to hear anything extra about each other, so I pulled on my boots and jacket and went walking. I crossed 3rd Avenue and 2nd and 1st. Car alarm went off in front of some Chinese laundry. I stuck my hands in my pockets and I'd wished I'd worn a hat. I passed an empty basketball court, and then I waited for the traffic on the FDR Drive, then walked the last block to the East River. To my right and left were bridges over to Queens, though from where I stood, I could only see the backs of warehouses. There's dry weeds 5 feet tall, then the gray river swirling by fast. The snow had stopped, and I started walking along the cobblestone walk. One morning, I skipped school and cut through backyards to your house. I didn't know your mother was home from Nebraska, and I almost stepped back when she answered the door. She dyed her brown hair black. She wore sweatpants and a sweater. She had a cold sore on her bottom lip, and she'd gained weight, but she smiled and kissed me on the cheek and invited me in. The small kitchen was clean and warm. It smelled like coffee and cinnamon rolls. She put one on a napkin and handed it to me. I thanked her, and while I chewed the sweet, buttery bread, she lit up a cigarette and asked about my mother. Then you came downstairs in just your jeans. No shirt, your chest pale and thin, your nipples pink, and your mother rushed over and kissed and hugged you like you'd been gone and just gotten home. And you didn't pull away. You hugged her back, and when your eyes caught mine, you lowered your face into the hair at her shoulder and kept hugging.